Good morning, everybody, or actually, it's good afternoon now, and welcome back. We have four interviews today. This is the second of the four. So, my second guest of the day is Mr. Rob Richardson. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thank you for your time this morning. We're going to get to Rob in just a minute. I do want to go ahead and make the quick commercial announcement. Our friend Chris Gardner is taking DevSpace virtual this year. It will be tomorrow, September the 11th, Friday, September 11th. Starts at about 8:30 or 9 o'clock Central Time. It's going to be broadcast live on Twitch on their Twitch channel, DevSpaceConf. You can go to devspaceconf.com or follow them on Twitter at DevSpaceConf for all the details. So, Rob, I know I sent the list of questions out to you, but I've got one I'm going to ask everybody starting off. And that is,
No
give us the 60 to 90 second elevator pitch about Rob Richardson.
Yeah. So this is a lot of fun. We get to jump into all kinds of cool things here at TDevConf. It's really fun to be able to present here. Rob Richardson, I love to present the things that I've learned and start to learn together with you. So I'm really excited to join to be able to do that. I do a lot of presenting on Kubernetes and Docker and ASP.NET and Node and React and Vue and build servers and continuous integration. And so, it's really fun to reach that point in my knowledge where I feel like I've got enough that I can share, and to be able to share that above and beyond, rather than just sharing it with myself, to be able to share it with others so that we can all learn together. It's really fun to join in that learning community here.
Awesome. So we've known each other for several years, and so I know that you've got a lot of experience. But how did you get started? What was your first computer?
Oh, this is a good one. I am 10. I'm in the library because they had the computer, and it was so cool.
Computer.
It was my turn on the computer, and the way you did it was you went up to the desk at the library, and you could flip through this book. They had laminated pages of all the games that they had there, and I had just finished up this game, and I wanted to play a different game, and so I went and flipped through the book, and I found this drawing program, and I'm like, oh, that looks really cool, and so I asked them for the disk of the drawing program. They handed me an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, a graph paper, and down at the bottom, it said 10 print, and explained the way that you use the BASIC to program this drawing. And so the theory was you draw on this graph paper and then write the program that will draw that on the screen. And that was it. I was so hooked, and I wanted to go back and do programming from then on. And so, all the way through, through school, I was just like, can I get more time on this computer? Eventually, when I got into college, I was like, this is a really cool hobby, but I didn't think it was actually a profession per se. So it was just that thing that I did outside of class, outside of work. And then eventually I realized that I could do this for a living, and it was so much fun.
That's I kind of fell into it the same way. My degree is in music. I went to school for music, and but music, of course, obviously is very technologically oriented nowadays, even more so than it was back when I was in music school. But I eventually became more interested in the technology, and not so much interested in music as a profession. So yeah, and that's one of the great things about this industry that we're in is you don't necessarily have to have a PhD in computer science to be a developer these days.
Yeah, definitely. It's about problem solving. It's about breaking things down into smaller problems, solving each of those problems in a very scientific way, and then building those solutions back up into a holistic solution that you can use to solve that overall problem. So that process of breaking down problems into smaller pieces and then scientifically solving each piece, there's nothing magical about that. There's nothing, super stupendous about that. It's just a methodology of thinking, a methodology of reasoning that is really cool. You can learn that. You can jump into this profession and you can do really excellent things there.
No, I agree completely. And it's not necessarily something that, okay, maybe the seed to do that can be planted when you're in high school or college, but if you go through all of the coursework that you go through in college, will you necessarily have those problem solving skills? You may be better prepared eventually to acquire them, or even acquire them more quickly. But it's something that you can learn, but not necessarily something you can be taught. And that's one of the great things, is that as long as you're willing to go through that process, anybody can do this.
Yeah.
So sure, you've used a lot of different tools through your through your career, that is. What's your favorite code/text editor that you're working with right now, or that you have used?
What's my favorite code/text editor?
Mm-hmm.
I thought you were going to ask me what's my favorite programming language. My favorite programming language is actually PostScript. It's a methodology.
Really?
It's a language used
Mm-hmm.
in printing. It's kind of the language behind PDFs.
Yeah.
And what's really elegant about PostScript is that they have very few primitives. They have a stack and a few simple functions like add to the stack or swap the stack or create a new function. And from there, you can build up the everything. When I was doing PostScript, I was doing it with VI. And so, VI is my text editor. Mm-hmm. I hope I'm not offending the Emacs people. VI was a lot of fun too. Nowadays, I mostly use VS Code because VS Code just has a really fast startup experience, but it also has a great ecosystem of plugins that allow you to hook into all kinds of things. So I'll hook it into Jupyter, or I'll hook it into ESLint, or I'll hook it into various program builders and compilers and language services. So it's pretty versatile. It works out pretty well.
You mentioned using VI. So I spent a lot of time in the Python world, and I believe you spend time there as well. So you may have run across some Pythonistas who believe even today that you're not a real developer unless you use them. So yeah, good friend of mine who we run the Python user. In fact, we run the Python user group here that you're going to be speaking at a week from Monday, if I'm not mistaken. He's one of those. He is a hardcore Vim user, and he can do magic with it. But no, I'm a VS Code user as well myself. If you want to talk about
one of the things that I think is really awesome is a great way to create randomness, that is truly random, is to put a junior developer in front of VI and invite them to quit.
Well, it is interesting because you mentioned Jupyter Notebook, and Jupyter Notebook, there's a lot, as far as the, obviously it looks completely different, but as far as the interactions, so, the some of the keyboard shortcuts and, you're having the command versus edit mode that Jupyter Notebook actually picks up from Vim. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. So you mentioned your favorite programming language. I'll go ahead and ask you this. What's your least favorite programming language?
My least favorite programming language. I've had a lot of fun programming in lots of things. Some of the things I wouldn't own up to anymore. It was really fun to figure out in Flash the event loop, for lack of a better term. If you create a one-frame animation, now you have an event loop where you can listen to events continuously and do interesting things. That was some interesting stuff. I've done weird stuff in VBA before. I did a thing in Excel where I popped open a VBA macro that actually showed a Windows form screen and allowed users to enter stuff that at that point then just went into the spreadsheet. I used it for time tracking. And in hindsight, I built a program around the spreadsheet instead of building a simple entry around a database. So I kind of solved the wrong problem, the opposite problem. But VBA was, kind of interesting. Everything was really weird.
Yeah, I've done some interesting stuff with VBA out of necessity. The actually I've heard that the number one feature request for Excel is Python support. I
Interesting.
yeah, I think that is, I've heard a lot of people say that is, or at least it's one of the top. I mean, we have OpenPixel that we can use
Mhm.
to manipulate spreadsheets, but as far as as far as having the full functionality of VBA, it's not there, at least not to
Right.
my knowledge. But no, it's no, I VBA is interesting. There's all kinds of different programming languages out there that we could go into. But what I
Yeah.
would like to talk about is go ahead and move on to what you're going to be talking about at TDevConf. So the title of your talk is Docker for Windows Container Development. So why don't you go ahead and give us a preview of what that's going to involve?
Yeah. Docker for Windows container development is such a fun talk, and I'm going to have so much fun giving it. I hope you'll have a whole lot of fun attending and participating. It is really cool. We start off with an empty folder and a terminal and run from there. We're going to build up Docker containers, Dockerizing .NET workloads. And so as you're coming in as a Windows developer, perhaps you've always been familiar with Windows Forms or ASP.NET or those things that are very specifically Windows specific, and you're kind of curious, does this Docker environment apply to me at all? So we'll start with a .NET Framework website, and typically when we have a .NET Framework website, we'll have the website and then we'll have the supporting Windows service. And so we'll start off with those two, the website and the Windows service, and we will live code Docker files for both pieces. And these Docker files will run these containers on Windows. So, we'll have Windows containers and they'll work just fine. We'll talk through a little bit about, what is Docker and how does that work at the same time. And then we'll flip over to kind of a greenfield experience where we say file new inside Visual Studio and build up a .NET Core website and Windows service. What's cool is Visual Studio will give us some tooling to build out the Docker files that will help us. Those Docker files aren't great, but they can get us through the day. And then we'll talk through, those methodologies that we need to convert an application to be container ready and start to dig into those pieces. For example, one of the assumptions that Docker makes is that it's only running a single process. So things like a Windows service that assume that it can kind of start up and run in the background, that doesn't really make sense in a Dockerized environment. So come join us and learn how we can take a Windows service and a website, both in .NET Framework and in .NET Core, and move them into containers running on Windows, either inside just regular Docker or running inside of a Kubernetes cluster.
So now you talk about Windows container development. Now I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I have never run Docker, used Docker with Windows. I've used it with .NET Core, but I've used it in a Linux environment. And so how and this may so excuse me if this is a completely noob question, but I know that very often what I'll do if I'm starting off a Docker container, I'll go and I'll look at Docker Hub and see if there's something already up there that meets my needs that I can build off of, or pieces that I can use to compose a new container or whatever. But with Windows, but that's because I'm using that. But that's one of the things that facilitates that is I'm using Linux. With Windows, you have licensing issues. How do you deal with those licensing issues when you're using Docker for Windows?
That's actually really cool. And you've touched on quite a few really cool pieces there. Docker Hub is a great place to host your images, either to pull down images created by others or to publish your own images. And what's cool is those are just images. It isn't specific to a particular operating system or even a platform. So you can host x64 images, you can host ARM images, you can host Linux images, and you can host Windows images. So as you're going to Docker Hub, if you want to build an ASP.NET Framework app, pull down the ASP.NET Windows-based image, and everything works great. towards licensing, that's one of the things. It's like, okay, so now I'm running Windows. Do I need another license of Windows to run each container? And what's beautiful about Docker is that Docker virtualizes the operating system. So unlike virtual machines where you're virtualizing the hardware, in Docker, you're virtualizing the operating system. And Microsoft specifically licenses the operating system. And so in this case, when you're running a Docker container, the operating system lives outside the container. So if you have a Windows container, there's nothing to license associated with Microsoft Windows.
Okay.
If you have a license to the host, you can run as many guest VMs as you need to.
Okay. That makes sense. And I don't know why I've actually never tried to run Docker. I run Docker desktop on Windows, but I've never actually worked with a Windows container. So what about maybe some of the challenges, or if there are any? Because like I said again, this Windows container thing. I need to be the one who moderates your talk so I can see it. But
yes, please come join us.
So what about if there are any challenges between running an ASP.NET Framework application in a Windows container and an ASP.NET Core application in a Windows container?
Yeah, ASP.NET Core is cross-platform, and so you could run it in a Windows container or you could run it in a Linux container. And to that end, Linux is a more mature implementation of Docker. The Windows implementation of Docker is newer. It's still mature enough for production and it works great there. But there are some sharp edges there. For example, the base images for Windows containers are either Windows Server Core or Nano Server, both of which are significantly larger than either a regular ASP.NET image on Linux or the Alpine image that is maybe 50 megs. Alpine images tend to be dozens or hundreds of megs. The other images may be hundreds or maybe a couple of hundred megs. The Windows-based images tend to be a dozen gigs. And that can be one of the big barriers. Because of the nature of Docker layers, each layer is isomorphic. So once you have that layer, you have it. You don't need to download it again.
Right.
So once I've downloaded that base Windows image for each version of Windows Update, then I don't need to download those half dozen gigs ever again. But getting it the first time can be a little bit weird and take some bandwidth. So, all else being equal, when I get to ASP.NET Core, once I'm a little bit more comfortable with Linux, I may choose to move my Docker containers from Windows to Linux as well, and that is completely sufficient. The bummer part is that ASP.NET Framework must run on .NET Framework, which must run on Windows.
Right.
So at that point, yeah, you really do need a Windows container.
Right.
But if you can move from .NET Framework to .NET Core, then you can start to take advantage of that cross-platform nature and then start to choose whether you'd rather run on Windows or Linux.
Now, you said that in the talk you're going to go into Visual Studio, but you said that you're really liking Visual Studio Code. So how much of what you're going to, because one of the things there's a talk that I do about Visual Studio Code where I show the cross-platform developer experience. Now, of course, here you wouldn't be working with a cross-platform, but how much of what you can do in Visual Studio with Windows containers can you also do in Visual Studio Code?
All of it. I'm using Visual Studio because those who have done .NET Framework are probably running inside of Visual Studio. Visual Studio has had great support for C# and .NET for a long time. And so to be more compatible with the audience, to meet you where you are, we'll definitely start in Visual Studio. But once you move to .NET Core, you can use Visual Studio, or you can use Visual Studio Code or Sublime or Notepad. It's just a text editor. Visual Studio Code isn't great at .NET Framework apps, but it is wonderful at .NET Core.
Right.
And if all you need is a text editor to just do that quick edit in one file, or to just take a look at the Docker file, you can do that in VS Code, whether you're using .NET Framework or .NET Core or Python or JavaScript or Node. VS Code can be a great editor for all of those.
Awesome. So you obviously have your hands in a lot of different technologies and such. How would you explain what you do, however, to an elementary school student?
How would I explain what I do to an elementary school student? That is cool. Part of why I like to have my hand in so many pies is I like to be able to cross-pollinate those cultures. And cross-pollinate isn't a 5-year-old word, but I noticed that when I joined the Node community, my C# got much better. I started thinking in lambdas, which allowed me to use func of T in really elegant ways. And so that cross-pollination of cultures is really helpful. To a 5-year-old, what do? I start to solve problems. So a user may come to me with this big problem, something overarching like, I don't know, go clean your room. Well, my room is so dirty. It's so messy. I don't even know where to begin. So, well, let's break that problem down. Well, I've got my bed. My bed isn't made. Maybe there's some stuff on my bed. I've got a floor. There's some stuff on the floor. I've got some clothes. Maybe the clothes need. Okay, so let's break each of those things down into those problems. I've got clothes. I've got toys. I've got to put away some stuff. I might have some trash I need to collect. And let's go solve each of those problems. Once we've got those problems solved, we can come back at it and go, yeah, I've cleaned my room. As a software developer, I'm doing a similar thing. Let's go build a website, or let's go build an application that will solve all of these problems. I need to be able to keep track of something, or I need to be able to visualize something. And that's kind of a big problem. But let's break it down into its smaller pieces. Well, I need a screen to be able to log in. I need a screen to be able to edit the data. I need to be able to save the data. So I need a back end that can allow me to authenticate correctly, validate that I am the user that I say I am. I need to be able to store that data in a data store, in a database, and be able to bring that back out. And so with each of those problems, let me dive into that space where I can solve that problem. So for the login, I might use OpenID Connect. For the edit screen, I might use Vue. For the backend, I might use ASP.NET or Node or Flask. For the database, I might use SQL Server, or I might use MemSQL, or I might use Redis. At each of those stages, I can pick that solution. I can build up the SQL and the C# and the JavaScript. And when I'm done, now I have a great application that we can start to use to solve that problem. A thing that didn't exist before, but that I was able to create to solve this problem. So ultimately, for the 5-year-old, what do? I create stuff. Yep. And it is so fun.
Mm-hmm. No, in fact, at one time, what I would do is I would tell people that I am a problem solver masquerading as a software engineer. Is what I would tell them. Recruiters do not like that at all. So if anybody's looking for a job, do not use that line. But that's one of the reasons I decided to become self-employed. But you mentioned something there that kind of took me by surprise. You said that when you started to write Node.js, it helped your C#. And you said, things like lambdas. Could you go into that a little more? That's kind of a personal interest question for me.
Yeah.
Because people who know me know that I have a little love lost for JavaScript. I'm not a big fan of it. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited for Blazor, because I can do front end web development without touching JavaScript. But I'd be interested to know, what are the some of the other benefits that you saw being involved with Node.js that helped you with C# or with other languages?
Yeah. JavaScript is weird, and arguably modern JavaScript is not anything like the JavaScript that we used to do. If you learn JavaScript in the jQuery days or in the pre-jQuery days, when you were just kind of validating forms and doing some cute little things, then yeah, JavaScript is weird. Debugging a website running Internet Explorer 4.5 on Mac was not a good day. But what JavaScript did that is brilliant is it created functions as first-class citizens. So a function is a thing. You can pass a function in as a parameter in the same way that you would pass in an integer or a string. You can take a function and you can assign it to things. You can build up functions. Currying is probably a term that'll get us in trouble here, but you can build up functions by, kind of grouping them together and binding parameters into place. And so as you start to build up these things, then and pass them into other things, modern Node, modern JavaScript is really asynchronous. And so I'll often pass in a callback function or await for a thing to finish. And so JavaScript Node is arguably asynchronous to a fault. And it was probably one of the first places where asynchrony was really popular in a way that mass consumers could consume. And, there's lots of languages who did asynchrony first. JavaScript definitely wasn't the first one. Right. But that concept of functions being first-class citizens and the concept of asynchrony in all the things allowed me to then step into my C# and notice that there are lots of places where I have a lot of code that is pretty much the same except for things on either side. So for example, a SQL class, a class doing ADO.NET. Now this class will do data access. And so its purpose is to open a database connection, run a command, harvest the results, and then ultimately clean up the connection and the parameters. I noticed that in all the places that I did ADO.NET, I needed to do that. I needed to open the connection. If the connection succeeded or failed, I needed to take proper action there. Then I needed to go shim null into dbNull.value, because apparently that's a thing. And then I needed to execute that statement, setting whether it was a stored procedure or a command. And then the part that was different was reading the results. So in that function, my SQL execute function, I pass in a lambda, which is the reader. I'll pass in the SQL statement, I'll pass in the list of parameters, and I'll pass in that reader lambda. And then this function will do all of the things of opening the connection and validating all the parameters, and then it'll call the reader function. And then when the reader function does what it does, then it will clean up those parameters from the stored procedure and close the connection. In time, we may want to put retries in the SQL executor function. Now I have one generic function that will do any kind of database reading. So I don't need one for execute scalar and execute reader and execute non-query. I just have one function. And that methodology came to me by learning JavaScript first. Once I got the concept of lambdas and asynchrony, then I could build this SQL helper library in C# using those methodologies. Func of T is no longer this scary beast. It's a really powerful tool for building up these kind of boilerplate-like things where I have enough complexity that I need to do something, but not enough value to duplicate it everywhere.
That makes sense. And yes, that idea of, definitely an idea of a function as a first-class object is something that, especially people that were in its pre-C# days, because Visual Basic didn't have any of that. That is something that and also sometimes people see it as, are we getting into function pointers or whatever, which are really scary. But no, that makes a lot of sense. So you, I'm almost wondering if this next question is even needed, because it sounds like you spend most of your time doing tech stuff. But what do you do outside of work/tech?
I actually have two main passions in my world.
Mm-hmm.
I love coding
mm-hmm.
and I love teaching.
Okay.
And so what I've found is that getting to do both, teaching code and coding
Mm-hmm.
is what I do most of the time. And so I've gotten really good into conference speaking and getting to share my knowledge. And so arguably that's my hobby. It's also now my profession, which is pretty cool. Outside that, I love playing with my family. It's really cool to be able to come home and get to share with them the excitement that I did today, get to see the excitement that they've done. My son and my daughter are amazing. It's really cool.
No, and that's really kind of when I thought I was going to ask that question, and this is to actually of all the speakers, it's like, but so much when you're a speaker, because you basically live, eat, and breathe this stuff. It's not something that you do 8 to 5 Monday through Friday to finance the life you really want. It is the life that you want. So, so that's good. Now you mentioned, you're a conference speaker and everything. What other things do you do to make the community awesome?
Conference speaking is one of the bigger ones. Right. I do a live stream every Friday at 11 at twitch.tv/memsequel. And right now we're doing a front end thing. We've built up a product catalog in a really interesting way so that we get to experiment with Node and Express on the back end. We get to experience Vue on the front end. We've done some OpenID Connect, not OpenID Connect. We've done some JWT authentication pieces. Tomorrow, I'm not sure if this will air by then, but we're actually doing some really cool things with authenticating to the database. And so that's been a fun thing to share with the community. Conference speaking is a big one. I also do small mentoring. And so I have a mentor that is in Utah that we meet with. We get to meet together about once a week and learn really interesting things. So whether it's sharing to a room full of 100 or 1,000 people or sharing to a room full of one, it is so much fun to share and teach and learn together.
Awesome. And did I get the Twitch? Did I get the Twitch right? MEMSQL?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Okay.
TV/MEMSQL.
Okay. Great. So we're running about up on time, and I want to get your closing thoughts, but I'm going to go ahead and do a couple more quick commercial announcements. First of all, like I said, you are the second of 4 today, so the morning and evening sessions are packed. This evening, we're going to start off at 6:15 p.m. We're going to have Brian Krasinski. He's going to talk about machine learning in C#. And then we're going to have Chad Green, and I've got a whole list of things to troll Chad about. Because actually, Chad doing these interviews is actually my inspiration. Chad's my inspiration for that because he did the same thing for Codepalooza. So that'll be a lot of fun. So be sure to come back this evening and check out Brian and Chad's interviews. TDevConf tickets, we still got them. In fact, just as we were talking, Rob, we had the 149th ticket. So if you act now, you can be number 150 if you act now. But if you go to bit.ly/TDevConf 2020 tickets, of course, if you're watching this on the archive, that 150th ticket, I'm sure. I'm hoping the 200th ticket will have been claimed by then. TDevConf is Saturday, October the 3rd. That is 3 weeks from the day after tomorrow. So it's coming up quickly. Mark your calendars. Go to tdevconf.com for all the details and follow us at TDevConf on Twitter. Rob, the floor is yours to close us out.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun getting to interview. I'm really looking forward to speaking at TDevConf. If you'd like to see other presentations like this, or you'd like me to speak at your group, hit me up on Twitter at Rob_Rich, or email me from the link at robrich.org. And you can find the presentation that I'll give at TDevConf on robrich.org as soon as we do it as well. So if you're looking for a talk for your user group or your conference, definitely hit me up. Also, if you'd like to speak, I run the southeastvalley.net user group in Phoenix. And if you'd love to speak there, then I'd love to host you there as well.
All right. Well, sir, thank you very much for your time this morning. My guest, or actually, I'm sorry, this afternoon is morning for you because you're in Pacific.
Yes, we're time traveling.
Yes, but my guest for this episode has been Mr. Rob Richardson. Rob, thank you for agreeing to speak at TDevConf. We're looking forward to it, and thank you for everything that you do to make the community awesome.
Most definitely, glad to help.
All right. Again, join us this evening, 6:15 p.m. Central Time, and we'll see you then. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you later.
That looks so cool. I want to go.